Hold out your thumb. The width of the nail, half an inch. 12 millimeters. In 2007, Vietnam was building a bridge it had wanted for decades. Its main spanned the longest in Southeast Asia. It did not fail there. It failed on the plain part, the low spans walking out from the riverbank. One September morning, a temporary footing sank 12 millimeters deeper on one side than on the other. 20 seconds later, 2,000 tons of fresh concrete were on the ground. 250 men were working on it and under it. This is Vietnam's deadliest construction collapse, and the story of the smallest number in the file. The Mekong Delta is a country made of water. One of its great arms is the How River, wide, brown, and slow. On one bank sits Cần Thơ, the delta's capital. On the other, Vinh Long Province and National Highway 1, the road that carries Vietnam from north to south. For generations, everything crossed the How by ferry. Trucks waited in long lines. In rough weather, the crossing simply stopped. A bridge here was a promise the country had been making itself for decades. In 2001, Japan agreed to lend Vietnam most of the money, development aid, on soft terms. 3 Japanese giants, Taisei, Kajima, and Nippon Steel, formed the venture that would build the main bridge. The design was elegant, 2 tall towers, fans of steel cable. But a bridge is mostly not its famous part. From each bank, ordinary approach spans had to step down to earth, pier after pier after pier. That is where this story lies. The Vinh Long approach rose over Mi Hoa, a commune of pomelo orchards. The fruit was famous. The money was thin. So when the bridge came, the orchard men signed on steady wages and the biggest project in Vietnam at the village gate. Fathers and sons, brothers and neighbors walked up onto the new spans together. Most of the workers on this stretch were local hires. For Mi Hoa, the bridge was the future, being poured in concrete over their trees. Here is how you cast a bridge span in midair. First, you build a bridge that nobody will ever see. Steel towers rise from the ground, temporary piers. Steel beams bridge across them. On top goes a mold in the shape of the deck. Builders call this whole hidden structure Foresee work. It is a full building's worth of steel, put up only to be torn down again. Foresee work has carried every concrete bridge you have ever crossed. When the deck can stand alone, the towers vanish, and no one remembers them. Into the mold, workers pour wet concrete. And fresh concrete has a secret: it is not strong. For its first days, it is just heavy mud held in shape. It cannot carry itself, so the Foresee work carries everything: the deck, the machines, the men. And the Foresee work hands every one of those tons down into the ground. Whatever the ground does next, the bridge does too. Under this stretch of deck stood a temporary tower with a dull name, T13U. The upstream tower between permanent piers 13 and 14. T13U stood on a concrete footing. The footing stood on piles, long shafts driven deep into the river soil. Two rows of piles, one footing. A pile works by reaching down until it finds ground firm enough to trust. But delta ground is young ground. The river laid it down in layers, sand here, softer sand there, and two piles a few steps apart can reach two different worlds. That is exactly what the geology check later found. The pile row near Pier 14 ended in loose sand. The row near Pier 13 ended in firmer sand. Not rock against mud, just loose sand against firmer sand, a difference you could miss between two handfuls. One footing, standing on two answers from the earth. The heaviest thing on the site that week was brand new deck. The crews had poured the concrete just the day before, a run of deck about the length of a football field. It weighed up to 2,000 tons and it was 1 day old. 1 day. No strength of its own yet. Every ton of it still hung on the Foresee work and on T13U. At sunrise on September 26, 2007, about 250 men clocked in welders, steel cutters, concrete hands from a patchwork of small companies. Around 150 climbed on top of the fresh deck to keep working it. Some 100 more worked below in its shadow. Above them, the deck. Under the deck, the Foresee work. Under the Foresee work, T13U and two kinds of sand. Nobody on the deck could see what the ground was doing. As the new weight bore down, the loose sand under one pile row gave way slightly. The footing of T13U tipped toward Pier 14. The tilt had a direction, along the line of the bridge from the bank out toward the river. How far? Investigators would later put a number on it, a computed 12 millimeters. Half an inch. The width of a thumbnail. A tilt that's small is invisible to the eye. You could stand on that footing and never feel it. To a loaded steel tower, it was enormous. Steel is a strict accountant. Tip a tower's footing and the loads inside stop flowing evenly. Some bars relax, others take far more than their share. T13U was braced by diagonal bars and the bars were joined with bolts. The extra load walked through those joints, bolt by bolt. When the numbers were run afterward, the force on some bolts had passed their breaking point by almost half again. Steel does not negotiate. It carries or it lets go. On the morning of September 26th, under 2,000 tons of 1 day old concrete, the first bolt let go. At about 8 that morning, a huge bang rolled across the site. It sounded like a blast. It was not one. Inside T13U, bolts were snapping, then the diagonal braces they held, one after another, then a main column bent. The tower gave out and everything it carried followed. The fresh deck cracked into pieces. Its weight slammed onto the head of permanent Pier 13 and tore the deck's last connection loose. That was the second bang. From start to finish. The collapse took about 20 seconds. Two spans came down from the height of a 10-story fall onto the men below. Then dust. Then silence. Then voices. The nearest hospitals emptied toward the river. Through the morning, more than 300 doctors and nurses reached the site. Soldiers, workmates, and neighbors dug with excavators, with pumps, with bare hands. People lined up in the city to give blood. By evening, 42 men were confirmed dead. The number kept climbing for weeks, 49. then 50 as injured men slipped away and 3 still missing in the wreckage. To reach them, engineers had to break the fallen slabs apart with small controlled blasts. The last man, Tran Van Haan, was brought out on the morning of October 17th, 3 weeks after the collapse. The final count, the one carved in stone, 55 dead, 80 injured. On the last evening of September, thousands gathered by the How for a memorial service. Vietnam's transport minister spoke first. From the bottom of my heart, I apologize to the people, to the victims and to their families, he said. Japan's ambassador spoke for his government, and the leaders of the contractors offered their own apology to the country. In Mi Hoa, the Pomelo Village, they were burying neighbors row by row. 34 of the 55 dead came from that one commune. The disaster had a nation's name on it. The grief had a village. Within a week, police opened a criminal case over the collapse. Days later, the government stood up a state investigation committee, chaired by the Minister of Construction, with experts pulled from across the country. Japan opened its own front. A vice foreign minister flew in and walked the wreckage. In Tokyo, the government convened a special council on the collapse. Through that winter, it met 5 times, tracking the cause and tightening the rules of aid-funded construction. The site itself went still, and stayed still for 11 months. The answer, when it came, was almost insultingly small. In July 2008, the committee reported to the government. The cause fit in 1 sentence, and the proof ran to 1,000 pages. The chain began in the sand. 2 pile rows, 2 soils, 1 footing settling unevenly that computed 12 millimeters. From there, the report walked the whole failure, joint by joint, and timed it, about 20 seconds end to end. The permanent bridge was never the problem. What failed was the hidden, temporary, ordinary part. Then came the sentence that would define the case. The settlement, the report said, was an unfortunate situation and hard to project in the design process. Hard to foresee, but not blameless. Responsibility, the minister said, lay with all 3 parties, his own side as project owner, the Japanese building consortium, and the Japanese supervising consultant. The contractors paid their civil dues. Compensation reached every stricken family. For the badly injured, it came to sums that, in Mi Hoa, could buy an orchard. And the criminal case from that first week stayed open, waiting on this very report. There is no public record that anyone was ever put on trial. After 11 months of silence, the cranes moved again, under new safety rules drawn from the findings. The approach spans rose a second time over the same orchards. On April 24, 2010, thousands of people walked onto the finished bridge. The Prime Minister cut the ribbon, with Japan's embassy at his side. The great ferry crossing of the How, after generations of service, was over. The Delta had its bridge, the longest cable-stayed span in Southeast Asia, its deck finally over the water. At the foot of the bridge, on the Vin Long side, sits a small pagoda, Chua Bo De. Inside stands a stone stele carved with 55 names. The official report of 2008 counted 54 dead. The stone counts 55. The families keep the larger number. Every September, engineers who built the bridge come back here, light incense, and stand for a while under the spans they finished. A 12mm tilt in wet sand. 3 bolted braces, 1 steel tower, 2,000 tons, 20 seconds, 55 lives. The investigators wrote it plainly. The ground under one temporary footing settled unevenly, and everything above it followed. And that is the probable cause. Sources are in the description.